Hello and welcome to week 3 of this NaNoWriMo program. I'm your host, MC Savio, and here we are in another random corner of my house. And today we're going to be covering dialogue and prose. And just a heads up, this is going to be the least structured of all these videos because it's more like a list of tips and tricks. But strap in and we're going to have fun. Alright, so dialogue. First thing to know about dialogue is just getting to the very basics, the visuals of the dialogue on the page. You want to make sure to have a new paragraph for each person speaking. I know that sounds like, English 101, everyone should know that, but I've seen it way too many times where new writers will just have a huge paragraph that's just tons of quotation marks through it, and you're struggling to understand who's speaking. So each time a new person begins speaking, drop down, have a new paragraph, indent. That way, even before you get to the dialogue tag, the reader just knows, okay, this is somebody else speaking. That helps so much with clarity, and it will make your writing flow a lot better. On the topic of dialogue tags, I want to point out, said is not dead. Said is a fantastic word. It causes very little friction for the reader. They're able to see character name, said, and then just carry on with the dialogue, and it flows very naturally. If you're always using tags like growled, divulged, whispered, it becomes almost comical. It feels unrealistic that you're always tagging on these like emotion-ridden words. And emotions are great. It's great to have some passion, some intensity with these clarifications. But for the most part, when people are communicating, they just say things. You just say said, and it flows very, very naturally. I mean, grab any book off your bookshelf, any novel that you've read recently, and spot how many times they use the word said. It's very, very common. It's very, very normal. Said is not dead. It's very much alive, so feel free to use it. In terms of functionality, your dialogue can do many different things, but it should primarily be employed to do two things. It should advance your plot, and it should reveal your characters. And really good dialogue can do both. So what do I mean when I say advancing the plot with dialogue? I'm not talking about as you know Bob conversations. If you don't know, when people talk about as you know Bob conversations, it's where you have two characters who are both in the know, like know what's going on in your world and in your story, describing what's going on in the world and in the story to each other. It's always very immersion breaking and it's just awful. But if you have sort of a mentor character and you have their student and the mentor is explaining things to the student, that's a good way to clue in the reader as to what's going on and get them up to speed, because you are actually getting somebody else up to speed and it's necessary. So you can justify a lot of those conversations, explaining how the space station works or where all the dragons went, or whatever it is you're trying to explain for your story, explaining it to somebody who truly does not know in your world. So that's a good trick for actually getting those passages on the paper and justifying it. When it comes to revealing your character through dialogue, this kind of goes back to our discussion from last week. You want to make sure that if your character is a very charismatic character, that they speak in a very charismatic way. If they're a very angsty character, you want to make sure that their dialogue reflects that. So I don't mean simply their stated intention, I mean how they speak. You're revealing their character through their choice of words and through their just basic speech patterns. Do they speak in, small, chunky sentences, or do they like to ramble on, like me? I don't know. That's pretty much all I have to say about dialogue, so let's charge on to the next one. We're going to start talking about prose. When it comes to your descriptions, don't rely simply on visual descriptions of what things look like. You also want to make sure to describe what things smell like, taste like, feel like, sound like. We have 5 senses, and even though you're restricted just to, black squiggles on a page, you want to describe things in all of the senses to try to make them feel more believable. And a good way to make sure you're doing that, at least a little bit more, make sure that you're using the other senses, is to highlight your different passages in different colors, one color for each of the 5 senses. So just a little example, an exercise that I did for a class a few years back, it would look something like this. So what I have here is I have all of my visuals are in yellow highlight, all of my sounds are in blue highlight, gray for the physical feeling of things, pink for taste, and green for smell. And so my description of one of my towns looks something like this. Of course, there's mostly yellow for a bunch of different visuals, but then there's also just the smell of the bakery. There's the sound of waves lapping. You want to make sure to just really, really flesh it out with all of the senses, because you want your environments, your characters, your objects, everything to feel real and alive. And if everything is just sort of sterile and it's just described only how it looks, that doesn't feel very alive. It doesn't feel very realistic. And I want to clarify, I don't want you to have a finished book with pages that look like this. Now, this is just a little exercise for your first draft, so you make sure that you're using other senses, other emotions, but then get rid of all your highlights. But yeah, it's just a good little trick to make sure that you're fleshing it out and making it feel more emotional. Speaking of fleshing things out and making them feel more emotional, metaphors are absolutely awesome. If you describe something in terms of something else, it can imbue it with certain emotions. For example, if something is black, you could describe it as being charcoal black or inky black. I mean, they're both kind of the same, but one strikes one emotion and the other strikes another emotion. I mean, if you want to say something like empty as a sinner's promise, that's fine. That's a good analogy. But if you want to say something like ebony as the inky darkness of a deep-sea creature's dwelling place in the coldest midnight of winter's hollow soul, just stop, please. Nobody needs that. I don't need that. You don't need that. The world doesn't need that. God doesn't need that. Nobody needs that. Please just don't. So yeah, I guess this module, for lack of a better term, has just been me ranting and rambling about my opinions on things. But that's a little bit more to think about, a little bit more to flesh out for your book. And yeah, I'm really, really excited for next week. It's going to be our last one. We're going to be wrapping up with our plot. And yeah, it's going to be great. I'm super excited. Hope you guys are too. And I will see you all in November. All right. Love you all. Bye.
Peggy. Give me my phone back.
I'm having a remote.
Oh, you're recording.